I have a question for you to start things off today, and I'm going to warn you, it sounds a little bit like the start of a very, very complicated riddle.
Oh boy.
But bear with me, because if the research we have in front of us is correct, this might be the only question that actually matters.
That is a high bar to clear right out of the gate.
I aim high. Okay, here it is. What if I told you that the opening lines of the book of Genesis, the obscure mythology of ancient Egypt, the most cutting-edge math in modern quantum physics, and the core tenets of Buddhist philosophy are all describing the exact same thing?
Okay. And just to be very clear for everyone listening, because I know how that sounds, you don't just mean they're all sort of nice or
Yeah.
that they share some vague, be kind to your neighbor,
Yeah.
moral platitude.
No, not at all. I'm not talking about vibes. I mean, what if they are describing the exact same structural reality?
Identical blueprints.
Exactly, like identical blueprints for how existence actually works, just, written in different languages and separated by thousands of years.
It is a bold premise. And honestly, when we usually hear claims like that, my alarm bells start ringing. It usually leads to someone trying to sell you a crystal or something.
Right.
But when you look at the source material we have today, specifically this expanded essay titled With the Beginning, it's, well, it's actually a very difficult conclusion to avoid. We're looking at a text that attempts to map the minimum set of conditions required for reality to exist.
Right, we're diving into With the Beginning. And
Yeah.
it is dense, it's cross-disciplinary, and honestly, reading it felt a bit like trying to crack a code. The author calls what they're doing convergence. Now, help me out here, because my first thought was syncretism. Isn't that what we call it when you just kind of mash religions together?
That is a crucial distinction to make before we even get started. It's so important. Syncretism is like a buffet.
A buffet, okay.
You take a scoop of Buddhism, a slice of Christianity, a little side of quantum mechanics, you mash it all together on your plate, and you just hope it tastes good.
You're making something new.
It's an invention. You are creating something new out of old parts. It's a remix.
It's a remix. Yeah.
Exactly. Convergence is different. Imagine there's a massive mountain. You have a team of cartographers mapping it from the north. They describe cliffs, snow, glaciers.
Right, all the northern features.
And then you have another team mapping it from the south. They're describing lush forests and rivers. The data, if you just look at it, looks completely different.
Yeah.
You'd think they were talking about two different worlds.
But if you calibrate the data, if you line it all up,
You realize they're mapping the exact same mountain. The terrain is different, the perspective is different, but the structure is identical. That is the mission for today. We aren't trying to invent a new religion. We're trying to find the architecture of reality that is already there.
the architecture, that's the phrase that really stuck with me. And as we went through the notes for this, we kept running into these four concepts. It didn't matter if we were in Jerusalem or Athens or a physics lab in Geneva. We kept hitting these same four pillars.
BEP, bearing, rest, and bond.
The big four.
Those are the big four. Or, if you want the more technical ontological terms, openness to differentiation, oriented energy, settled potential, and readily.
Relation.
And I have to warn you, by the time we get to the physics section, these aren't just metaphors anymore. They start looking a lot like the laws of thermodynamics and general relativity.
They really do.
But we have to start at the beginning, or I should say, with the beginning.
I see what you did there.
Let's jump into section 1. Rewriting the timeline. We need to talk about the very first word of the Bible.
Marriage.
Now, I went to Sunday school, so I know how this goes. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's iconic. It's probably the most famous sentence in history.
It is iconic, but the source material argues it's also grammatically and conceptually misleading. And this isn't just semantics. It changes the entire logic of the story that follows.
How so? Because in the beginning seems pretty straightforward to me.
Well, think about the preposition in. If I say, in the room there is a table, what has to exist first?
The room. The room has to exist before I can put the table in it. In the beginning sets up a container. It implies a timeline. Tick, tick, tick. Time starts. Then God enters this timeline. Then God starts making stuff.
It implies God is subject to time. That time is a box he steps into.
Exactly. It implies that the beginning is a room that God walks into, which, begs the theological question, who built the room?
Right. If God is entering a beginning, is the beginning bigger than God?
It's a headache waiting to happen. It's a logical paradox.
So the text suggests a different translation.
It does. The Hebrew preposition bet is, it's flexible. It can mean in, but it often implies accompaniment or instrument or circumstance. The argument here, and it's a strong one, is that the accurate translation is with the beginning.
With the beginning. It sounds like such a small change, but it feels completely different.
It shifts us from history to ontology.
Okay, pause. Ontology, that's a grad school word. Break that down for us.
Ontology is the study of being, of existence itself. History is about when things happened. It's a sequence. Ontology is about what things are, their structure.
I see.
So if we translate it as with the beginning, we aren't talking about a date on a calendar 13 billion years ago. We're saying that the beginning is a mode of God's existence. God doesn't enter a beginning. The beginning exists with God.
So it's a statement of simultaneity. There is no before.
Exactly. There's no before.
Yeah.
St. Augustine actually agonized over this in his Confessions. It drove him crazy. He writes about people asking him, what was God doing before he made the world? Was he bored? Was he just sitting there?
It's a fair question if you view time as a straight line that God is on.
It is. But Augustine realized the question itself was flawed because God made time. There is no before time. You can't ask what happened before the clock was built.
The clock didn't exist to measure the beforeness.
Right. So the beginning isn't a start date. It's a state of being. It's God becoming knowable. And this is where the text gets really granular. If we look at Genesis 1.2, the very next verse, we get a description of this pre-creation state. And it's not nothing. It's not a vacuum.
Right. This is the part that always confused me. It says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. That's a lot of inventory for day one.
Yeah.
You've got a deep, you've got a spirit, you've got waters. Where did they come from?
That is the million-dollar question. If God hasn't said, let there be anything yet, where did this stuff come from? Did God, go to a cosmic Home Depot and buy some deep?
If he did, then who built the Home Depot? We're right back to the who built the room problem.
Precisely. The source material makes a fascinating point here. These aren't separate gods, and they aren't pre-existing raw materials that God found lying around. They are aspects of wisdom.
Wisdom. As in God's wisdom.
Wisdom possessed, yes. Proverbs chapter 8 captures this perfectly. Wisdom is personified as a voice, and she says, the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way. Before the depths were brought forth, wisdom was there.
I see.
So when we see Teham, the deep, Ruach, spirit, and the waters in Genesis, we are seeing God's own wisdom, his internal structure, before it gets externalized into a physical world.
So it's like an MRI of God's mind right before he speaks.
That is a great way to put it, a perfect analogy.
Let's break those three down then, because they are the first three pillars of our architecture. First, Teham, the deep.
Teham, it shares a linguistic root with Tiamat. Now, do you know your Babylonian mythology?
Vaguely. Tiamat is a dragon, right? A sea monster.
A Teos dragon, a giant sea monster. In the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, creation is an act of violence. The god Marduk has to go to war with Tiamat, kill her, and then split her carcass in half to make the sky and the earth.
Wow. Very violent.
Very. But Genesis uses that same linguistic root, Tikham, but it strips all the personality and violence out of it. Tikham here isn't an evil dragon. It's a pure structural condition.
The essay described it as resources not yet visible.
Right. Think of it as openness. It's the depth that allows things to be different from one another. If you don't have depth, everything is just a flat surface. You can't build anything. Teham is the capacity for there to be something. It is the yawning openness.
Okay, so that's pillar one, depth or openness. Then we have the spirit, the Ruach Elohim, and the text says it was hovering.
The Hebrew word is merashephet. It's a very, very specific verb. It only appears one other time in Deuteronomy to describe an eagle.
An eagle.
An eagle hovering over its young, fluttering its wings, caring for them.
I love that image. So it's not a spooky ghost floating around a haunted house. It's an eagle. It's attentive. It's focused, carrying energy.
Exactly. It implies orientation. It implies bearing.
Yeah.
If Teham, the deep, is just open potential, just a big tank of gas, the spirit is the engine. It's the vector. It gives direction.
Okay, so we have openness and we have orientation. And then the third piece, the waters.
Water seeks the lowest place.
Mm-hmm.
It settles. It represents rest. It represents potential held in fullness. Think about a dam. The water behind the dam isn't doing anything technically. It's resting.
Mm-hmm.
But it is full of immense power.
Potential energy.
Correct. So you have depth, which is openness. You have spirit, which is bearing. And you have waters, which is rest.
And the source says depth plus spirit plus rest equals wisdom.
That is the pre-creation state. It's
Yeah.
not chaos. It's undifferentiated fullness. It's God holding all the potential of reality within himself, but it hasn't been spoken yet. It hasn't been made visible.
It's like a loaded spring or thinker right before they speak a sentence. Everything is there, but it's all internal.
And that leads us to the biggest logical puzzle of them all. Section 2. The problem of everything.
This part made my brain hurt a little. I had to read it a few times.
It's a spatial paradox. It's tough. If God is infinite, if God is Ein Sof, without end, and God is full of this wisdom, where's there room for anything else?
Right. If I have a room that is wall-to-wall water, floor-to-ceiling, compressed, no air bubbles, I can't put a stone in it. There is no here and there. There's only water.
Exactly. If God fills all of existence, how can a universe that is not God exist?
The problem of everything. So how do we solve it? What's the answer?
We pivot to the Jewish mystical tradition, Kabbalah, specifically the Lurianic tradition of a 16th century mystic named Isaac Luria. He proposed a concept called dimsum.
Zimzum, which translates to contraction.
Right. The argument is that the first act of creation was an expansion. We always think Big Bang, right? An explosion, an outward movement. Luria says, no, the first move was retraction. God withdrew into God's self to create a chalal, a void, a hollow space.
That is such a counterintuitive idea. It means creation begins as an act of subtraction, not addition.
It means the prerequisite for existence is space. And this is where the theology becomes deeply, deeply emotional. The source makes a crucial point. This happens because of love.
Because love requires an other.
Precisely. You cannot be in relationship with something that is just you. If I am everything, I am alone. To love, there must be a you distinct from the I.
So God essentially holds his breath. He pulls back to make room for us, for creation.
He creates a vacuum of divinity so that something finite can exist. It's an act of profound humility, really, a self-limitation.
And into that space, the tradition says, a ray of light enters.
The cave. And this light unfolds into structure, the sephirah. These are like the divine attributes. But notice the tension the source highlights. The tension between Chizd and Yevora.
Chizd is that overflowing love, right? Grace. And Yevora is judgment or boundaries.
Yes. And you need both. You absolutely need both. Think about our water room again. If you have only Chizd, unlimited flow, unlimited grace, the water rushes back in. It floods the system.
It collapses the space.
It dissolves the other back into God.
So too much love destroys the relationship.
Too much unboundaried love destroys the distinctness of the beloved. But if you have only Jevura, only boundaries, only walls, you have harsh isolation. The other is safe, but they are alone and unconnected.
So the very structure of reality relies on this constant balance. Enough boundary to stay distinct, enough love to connect.
Exactly. That is the architecture. Openness, bearing, rest, and this tension of relation. And what's fascinating, truly fascinating, is that if we leave Jerusalem and go to ancient Greece, we find Hesiod describing the exact same architecture.
Which brings us to section 3, the Greek echo. Now, I have to be honest. I suffered through Hesiod's Theogony in college.
You and me both.
It just felt like reading a phone book of gods, and then chaos begat Erebus, and on and on. I didn't see any deep philosophy there.
You aren't alone. It is usually read as a genealogy, a soap opera family tree for the gods. But the source material argues we need to demythologize it. Hesiod uses the word proton first. First of all, chaos came into being.
But again, not first, like Monday morning at 9 a.m.
No. First, like geometry. First you need a point, then you can have a line. It's logical priority. It's structural. Hesiod is building a model of existence. And look at his firsts.
Okay, let's map them. He starts with chaos. Now, in English, chaos means a mess, disorder. My teenager's bedroom is chaos.
Right. That's our modern usage. But the Greek word chainu means to gape or to yawn. It implies a gap, an abyss. It's not disorder, it's the yawning openness.
Wait a minute, that's tehom. That's the deep from Genesis.
It is an exact match. Hesiod is saying before you can have things, you need a gap to put them in. It corresponds perfectly to the chalal, the void from Kabbalah, and tehom from Genesis.
Okay, so chaos is openness. Then he lists Gaia, earth.
Gaia is the ground. She represents stability, but crucially, she provides bearing, up and down. Before Gaia, there is no orientation in the chaos. Gaia gives the coordinate system.
An hovering spirit.
She matches the spirit hovering, providing the vector, the direction.
And then Tartarus, the underworld.
The terminal depth, the place where things settle and stop falling, that matches the waters, the element of rest.
So we have the same three: openness, chaos, bearing, Gaia, rest, Tartarus. But Hesiod adds a fourth one right at the beginning: Eros.
Eros. And this is the game changer. Usually when we hear Eros, we think of Cupid.
Yeah, Valentine's cards, a little guy in a diaper with a bow and arrow.
Right. But for Hesiod, Eros is a primordial force. He's older than Zeus, older than the Olympian gods. The source defines Eros here not as romance, but as binding attraction.
Binding attraction, like gravity.
We're getting there. Absolutely. Think about it. You have openness, bearing, and rest. But without a bond, they're just three isolated concepts. They don't do anything. Eros is the force that pulls them together into a cosmos.
A cosmos meaning an ordered whole.
Right. Without Eros, the universe just flies apart. And this brings us to another Greek thinker, Empedocles. He viewed the entire universe as a kind of cosmic boxing match between two forces. Love, Philotes, and strife, Nikos.
Strife sounds bad. We usually try to avoid strife.
We do, but in this model, strife is necessary. Strife is differentiation. It's the force that pulls things apart so they can be distinct. It ensures that I am me and you are you, if love wins completely.
We all smush back together into a single blob.
Exactly. We return to the undifferentiated deep. We lose ourselves. But if strife wins completely, we are all just isolated atoms floating alone in the dark. Reality is the tension between the two.
It's the cheesed and Gavura balance again. Love and boundary. It's the same idea.
Precisely. And here's the hook that drags us, kicking and screaming, toward modern physics. The source says, love is the expenditure of energy for the sake of structure.
That is a powerful sentence. Love is the expenditure of energy for the sake of structure. It implies that holding things together actually costs something. It's not free.
It's not free at all. Which leads us perfectly into section 4, the physics of information. Because now we have to ask, is this just poetic language? Love binds the universe. That sounds nice, like a line from a pop song. But does the math hold up?
Right. Time to leave the poets and talk to the engineers.
Specifically, we need to talk about a physicist named Rolf Landauer and a concept called Landauer's principle.
Okay, lay it on me. I've heard this is where physics starts to sound like magic.
It kind of does, in simple terms. Landauer proved that information is physical.
Physical?
Physical. We tend to think of information ideas, data, memories, as abstract, floaty stuff.
Yeah.
Like software versus hardware.
Right. My thoughts don't weigh anything. I can't put an idea on a scale.
But Landauer proved that to erase a bit of information, to turn a 1 into a 0 in a computer, you have to pay a physical cost. You have to release a tiny, tiny amount of heat.
So thinking, or at least deleting data, generates heat.
Exactly. Erasure costs energy. Now, broaden that concept. Geometry, the shape of things, the structure of a log or a cell or a galaxy is information. It's data about where things are in relation to each other.
Okay, the source used the burning log analogy. I found this really helpful to visualize it.
Walk us through it. It's a great example.
Okay, so imagine I have a log, a nice piece of oak. It has a structure. It has grain, cells, a specific shape. That structure is information. It tells the universe, I am a log.
Correct. It's a pattern.
Then I throw it in a fireplace, it burns. Now, high school physics taught me the conservation of mass. The atoms aren't destroyed. The carbon, the hydrogen, they just turn into smoke and ash. The stuff is still there.
But the log is gone. The structure is gone. The geometry of logness has been erased. And what happened when that erasure occurred?
Heat and light, a lot of energy.
But that heat is the price the universe pays for erasing the information that was the log.
Right.
It shows that the structure itself, the bond holding those atoms in that specific pattern, was energetic. It wasn't free. The eros, the binding force of the log, was energy.
So holding the log together required energy, and when the bond broke, that energy was released.
Exactly. Structure is bound energy, and the erasure of structure is entropy.
Hit from bit. That's the John Archibald Wheeler concept, right?
Yes. Wheeler was a titan of physics, a contemporary of Einstein. If from bit. He argued that every physical a particle, a field, a star, ultimately derives from bits, binary yes-no answers to questions.
So at the bottom of reality, it's not a hard little ball. It's not a tiny marble.
No, it's a question. It's a relationship. Reality is relational all the way down. You can't get to a fundamental thing at the bottom. You just get to more and more relationships.
Which implies that the universe is made of information. And if information requires energy to bind it into a structure?
Then the universe is made of bound energy. It is made of love in the structural physical sense. And this gets even wilder, believe it or not, when we look at the holographic principle.
This is the black hole stuff. I always get lost here, so guide me gently.
Okay. Imagine a black hole.
Yeah.
Scientists wanted to know how much information you could stuff into it, how much data it could hold. They assumed the capacity depended on the volume, how much space is inside the sphere.
That makes sense. Like filling a bucket with water. Bigger bucket, more water.
It makes intuitive sense, but the math said no. The amount of information a black hole can hold is determined by the surface area of its boundary, the skin, the event horizon.
So the stuff on the inside is actually described by the skin on the outside? That's bizarre.
It's bizarre, but it's the math. The information of the deep is encoded on the face of the deep.
Wait, face of the deep? That's Genesis again. Darkness was on the face of the deep?
It is a stunning, stunning parallel. The biblical text says that interaction happens at the surface, the face. Physics says information is stored at the boundary. You only know the depth by interacting with its surface.
That is eerie. It's too specific to be a coincidence. Okay, but we have to talk about the biggest binder of them all, gravity. Because the source makes a very bold claim. Gravity is love. Now, come on, that sounds like something on a greeting card.
It does. It sounds very metaphorical.
Yeah.
But let's look at general relativity. Before Einstein, we thought gravity was a force, like a rope pulling the Earth to the sun.
Right, an invisible lasso.
But Einstein showed us that gravity isn't a force at all. It's actually geometry. Mass tells space-time how to curve. The sun curves the space around it. The Earth isn't being pulled, it's just rolling along the straightest possible line in a curved space.
So it's moving freely. It thinks it's going straight.
That is the key. It is moving freely. Gravity allows things to move freely toward one another. It creates a path for natural proximity without coercion.
Proximity without coercion. I like that phrase a lot.
Because if you force two things together, if I grab you and tie you to me, that's not gravity, and it's not love. That's a crash. It destroys the other.
It violates the zimsum. It fills the space that should be open for relation.
Exactly. Coercion destroys the internal structure of the thing being coerced. Gravity and love preserves the internal structure while bringing the objects into a beautiful, free relation.
So physics gives us a universe made of information bound by energy, where the ultimate binding force is a curvature of space-time that allows free movement toward the other.
Which sounds a heck of a lot like theology to me.
It sounds like the architecture of existence.
And it's not just the Middle East and Greece and physics labs. Section 5, the global tour. We find this pattern absolutely everywhere.
It's like finding the same fossil on every continent.
We do. And we can move through these a bit quicker, but the hits are undeniable. Look at Egypt again. Specifically, the Ogdoad of Hermopolis.
City of 8.
Right. They had 4 couples, 4 pairs of gods representing the primordial state. Nun and Nonet were the liquid ground, the waters. He and Hahet were boundlessness, which is Tehom. Kek and Kalket were darkness. And Amun and Aminet were hiddenness, or spirit.
It's the same list. Water, openness, darkness, spirit. It's uncanny.
But here is the kicker. 4 couples make 8 gods, right? The Ogdoad. But the Egyptian theology says from this Ogdoad comes the Enid, the 9. The 9th is Adam.
The one who completes. The finisher.
Adam represents the bond, the unity that emerges from all the other relations. Think about a marriage. There's the husband, there is the wife, that's 2. But then there's the marriage. The marriage is a 3rd thing.
It's a 9th.
It's a 9th that emerges from the bond. And it has its own reality.
And they had a concept for the ethics of this, right, Ma'at?
Ma'at. Truth, justice, order, right relation. But for the Egyptians, Ma'at wasn't just being a good person. It was physics. It was the cosmic glue. If the pharaoh didn't uphold Ma'at, the Nile wouldn't flood. The sun wouldn't rise.
So ethics and physics were the same thing?
They were both about maintaining the bond. And that ties back to Landauer. If bonds are physical structures, then breaking a bond lying in justice is a physical disruption of the cosmos.
Wow. Okay, let's jump to China, the Tao Te Ching.
Right. The Tao is described as the mother of the 10,000 things. But notice the method of the Tao. Wu Wei.
Non-action, or maybe effortless action.
Right. Water benefits 10,000 things and does not compete. It flows to the lowest place. It yields. It's that gravity concept again.
Yep.
Power through yielding. It binds the world not by grabbing it, but by being the curve it flows along.
And India, the Vedas, this has to be there too.
It is. You have Raita, cosmic order, same as Ma'a. But look at the description of the ultimate reality, Brahman. It's described as Sat Siddhananda.
Being, consciousness, bliss.
Map it.
Yeah.
Sat being is the depth of the resource, the openness. Sit consciousness is the spirit, the awareness, the bearing. Ananda bliss is the waters, the rest.
Why is bliss rest? That's an interesting connection.
Because bliss is self-sufficiency. If you are perfectly happy, perfectly content, you don't need to move. You rest in yourself.
Yeah.
There's no striving.
And creation is Leela. It's play.
Yes. God doesn't create because he's lonely or he needs a sandwich. God creates out of sheer overflow. Play. It's the joy of the bond expressing itself.
We see this in Islam too, right? The verse of light.
Ayatul Nur. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. But the key operative word in Islamic creation theology is Rahma, mercy. It comes from the word for womb,
Love.
the breath of the All-Merciful. Existence is God breathing out mercy. Again, it's a relational, nurturing bond that sustains being. It's the space, the womb, that allows life to grow safely.
And finally, Buddhism. You mentioned earlier that the essay matches Genesis with Buddhism. How? Buddhism doesn't talk about a creator god.
No, it doesn't. But it talks about dependent origination, pratityasamutpada. The core idea is when this is, that is. Nothing, and I mean nothing, exists independently. Everything is relation.
So the bond is the only thing that's real.
In a sense, yes. In Sunyata, emptiness isn't nihilism, it's not nothingness, it's the openness to home that allows relation to happen. If things were solid and fixed and self-contained, they couldn't relate to each other. They had to be empty of self-nature to be full of relation.
It's the same structure, over and over and over again. Depth, bearing, rest, and the bond that holds it all together.
Convergence. The same mountain from 4 different sides.
But there is one sticky point we skipped over in the Genesis section, and I saved it for section 6 because it deals with a specific problem: darkness.
Ah, yes, the necessity of darkness. This is usually where people get a little uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are taught light is good, darkness is bad. But in Genesis 1.3, God says, let there be light. But if God is light, like the verse of light says, like the New Testament says, why does he have to create it? Was he in the dark?
It's the same logic as the beginning. It's not a manufacturing process. The Hebrew phrase yehi or is jussive. It means let light be. It is a permission statement, an authorization.
Permission for what? For light to exist.
Permission for visibility. Permission for light to be seen. You see, you cannot see light without contrast. Imagine you are in a room of blinding, infinite white light. No shadows, no objects. What do you see?
Nothing. It's just white noise for your eyes. A whiteout.
Undifferentiated brightness is as invisible as undifferentiated darkness. You need contrast to see anything.
So darkness shoshek in Hebrew or Arabic and Greek, it isn't evil.
No. In this model, it's the frame of intelligibility. It's the background that allows the foreground to appear. Think of a chalkboard. You need the dartboard to see the white chalk. The darkness is what makes the light visible.
So when the text says darkness was on the face of the deep, it's not saying evil was there from the start. It's saying the chalkboard was ready for the chalk.
Exactly. The source calls this the Ogdoad concept, borrowing from the Egyptians. You have these 8 simultaneous necessary conditions: openness, bearing, rest, binding, and then their counterparts: invisibility, boundary, brightness, day. You need the boundary of darkness to see the brightness.
So none are bad. All are required for a knowable reality.
Right. Evil isn't darkness. Evil is the refusal of the relationship. Evil is the active destruction of the bond. But the darkness itself, that's just the canvas. It's a necessary condition.
This brings us to the so what section. Because if this is true, if this is the architecture of reality, it has massive, massive implications for how we live our lives. Section 7.
Right. We can't just leave this in the abstract. If physics and theology are describing the same structural reality, then ethics isn't just a set of arbitrary rules, it's mechanics.
It's the operating manual for the machine. So let's break down the implications. Point 1, relationships are real.
Energetically real. Go back to Landauer. If information is physical, and a relationship is a shared informational structure between 2 people, then a relationship has mass. It has energy. It's a real thing.
So when a relationship ends, when someone dies, or a divorce happens, or a friendship breaks,
You are erasing a physical structure. Grief is the thermodynamic cost of that erasure.
that hits hard. Because we usually tell people, oh, it's all in your head, just move on.
But physics says, no, it's not just in your head. You are paying the entropy bill for a destroyed bond. It validates the suffering. It says, this hurts because something real is being disassembled inside you and in the universe.
Wow. Okay, point 2, Ka'urdur Shurya is anti-love.
We touched on this with gravity. Gravity curves space to allow free movement. Coercion forces movement.
So if I try to control my partner or my kids or my employees, if I try to force them to do what I want,
You are acting against the fundamental physics of the universe. You are trying to achieve unity through force. That destroys the T-home, the openness required for relation. You turn the other person into an object. And you can't have a relationship with an object. You can only use it.
so true love requires maintaining the freedom of the other. It's the tzimtzum again. withdrawing your own power to make space for them to be who they are.
Exactly. If you don't withdraw, if you don't make space, you aren't loving, you are consuming. You're collapsing the void.
Point 3, respecting difference. This comes from the darkness and light discussion.
You need contrast to see. It's that simple.
So if I demand that you be exactly like me, if I want my whole world to think and act and look just like I do.
You are demanding blindness. You are demanding undifferentiated brightness. To love, there must be you and an I. Difference isn't a problem to be solved. It's the condition of connection itself.
This feels incredibly relevant to how polarized our world is today. We seem to just want to erase the other side.
Demonizing the other, whether it's political, racial, religious, is basically an attempt to erase the contrast that makes reality intelligible. It's an attempt to return to the void, but without the wisdom and fullness. It's a desire for nothingness.
Point 4, the bond is the ninth.
In any group or marriage or friendship, there isn't just you and me, there's us. And the US is a third entity. It's the bond, the item from Egypt.
The source said the bond makes claims on the participants. What does that mean?
It does. The marriage has needs that are different from the husband's needs or the wife's needs. The community has a reality that transcends the individuals within it. Honoring the ninth means realizing you are serving something larger than just your own self-interest, something you co-created.
And finally, ongoing creation.
Creation isn't over. It wasn't a week-long event 6,000 or 13 billion years ago. It is the eternal articulation of intelligibility. It's happening right now.
So every time we understand something or learn something new.
Every time we understand, every time we form a true bond, every time we uphold Ma'at, every time we engage in wu-wei, we are participating in Genesis. We are saying, let there be light. We are making the world more knowable and more livable.
That puts a lot of responsibility on us. We aren't just tourists here on Earth, we're construction workers.
We are articulators. We help the universe know itself.
So, to wrap this whole thing up, we started with a very bold claim. Genesis, physics, myth, all saying the same thing.
And I think we've made the case. One field of potential, Teham. One light of awareness, wisdom. One binding love expressed as both gravity and grace.
It's a grand unification theory, but for the soul.
It connects the equations on the chalkboard to the prayers in the sanctuary. It suggests that the universe is not a cold, empty, random place. It is a place that is structurally designed for relation.
I want to leave our listeners with that final thought from the essay, the one about the cost of love.
Love is the most expensive thing in the universe. Energetically, per land hour, per the binding energy of atoms, holding things together costs everything. But because energy is conserved, the universe does not forget its bonds.
The universe does not forget its bonds. That's a comforting thought.
It is. The information is always there.
So as you go about your week, maybe look for the bond, look for the ninth in your life, in your relationships, and maybe, just maybe, stop trying to force things and start curving the space instead.
Let gravity do the work.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are engaging with a text that makes a claim so audacious, it fundamentally reorders how we look at the universe. We're looking at the expanded edition of With the Beginning, a manuscript that attempts to map a structural convergence between ancient creation narratives, Genesis, the Kabbalah, the Tao, and the hard science of thermodynamics and general relativity.
And it is a fascinating, if somewhat dizzying read. The central question we're tackling is whether creation is a timeline of historical events, something that happened once, long ago, or if it's an eternal structural reality. The text argues that love is not just an emotion we feel, but a physical law as fundamental as gravity.
Exactly. And I'm here to argue that this text successfully demonstrates what it calls a structural ontology. It posits that reality is made of relationships, not things. It suggests that what we call bond and relation are the primary building blocks of the universe.
And I, naturally, will be taking the skeptical view. I mean, while the system presented is undeniably elegant, I have significant reservations about collapsing distinct categories. When you start equating geometry with love or darkness with informational contrast, you risk stripping the universe of its moral weight. I'm just not convinced that physics metaphors can fully bear the load of theological truth without snapping under the pressure.
I see why you might think that, but let me give you a different perspective. The text isn't really using metaphors. It's arguing for identity. It begins with a fundamental shift in how we read the very first word of the Bible, Genesis 1:1. The Hebrew word is bereshit.
Which is usually in the beginning.
Right. Standard translations render this as in the beginning, implying a container of time into which God steps to create. But the text argues, quite convincingly I think, that grammatically it means with the beginning.
Okay. It's a subtle distinction, but does it really change the physics of the situation?
It changes the entire architecture of reality. If it's with the beginning, it is a statement of simultaneity, not chronology. The text argues that creation is not a movie that started running 14 billion years ago. It is an eternal act of intelligibility, and it outlines what it calls the Ogdoad, a set of 8 simultaneous conditions that must exist for anything to be real.
Okay, let's pause there, because Ogdoad is a heavy term to drop without explanation. Why does that matter?
It matters because it challenges our whole idea of cause and effect. The text argues that for any entity to exist, an atom, a person, a star, 4 pairs of conditions must be present simultaneously. You have depth or openness, bearing, which is orientation, rest or potential, and bond, the relation that holds them. The argument is that you can't have one without the others. They don't happen in a sequence. They are the structural requirements for existence. You can't have bearing, up and down, without depth or space to be in. They arise together with the beginning.
I'll grant that the linguistic analysis of Bereshit is compelling, and the logic of necessary conditions is, it's sound. However, the leap from a Hebrew preposition to a universal theory of physics is where I hesitate. You mentioned the Ogdoad. The text draws parallels between this Hebrew structure, the Egyptian Ogdoad of Hermopolis, the Greek primordials in Hesiod, and even Vedic concepts.
Because the convergence is there.
Or because the author is looking for it. This is my concern with the whole method of convergence mentioned in the preface. I mean, when you look at Hesiod's theogony, you see a genealogy of gods, titans, monsters, specific cultural artifacts. When you look at the Egyptian Ogdoad, you see distinct deities like Nun and Nausanit or Kuk and Kauket. To strip them of their cultural and mythological specificity and just reduce them to abstract concepts like depth or bearing, it feels like we're imposing a modern philosophical framework onto ancient minds. It feels like distinct cultural expressions are being flattened to fit a spreadsheet.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the text specifically addresses that danger, the danger of syncretism. It argues that these traditions, separated by continents and centuries, are encountering the same real. Take the concept of love. In Hesiod, Eros isn't a romantic Cupid. Eros is a primordial force that binds chaos and Gaia. The text argues that love is an ontological force. It's the binding principle that holds distinct entities together. If you look at physics, what holds the universe together? Gravity, binding energy. The text suggests these are the same phenomenon observed from different angles. Love is simply the name for the bond of relation.
And that is where the analytical mind starts to, sound the alarm. Equating gravity with love is a beautiful, poetic maneuver. But is it true? Gravity is a fundamental interaction describing the attraction between masses. Love is a complex biological, psychological, and perhaps spiritual experience involving will and emotion. So when the text claims that gravity is love expressed as geometry, it risks anthropomorphizing physics in a way that just obscures the actual science. It sounds profound, but does it actually mean anything scientifically testable?
That brings us directly to the core of the debate, specifically the physics of information. The text relies heavily on Rolf Landauer's principle from 1961. This is hard science. Landauer proved that information is physical, specifically that erasing information has an irreducible energetic cost. It releases heat.
Right, I'm familiar with Landauer's principle in the context of computing and thermodynamics. It sets the lower bound for energy consumption in computation.
But follow the implication. The text argues that geometry, the shape of space-time, the arrangement of atoms in a log, is information. It's relational data. So when a log burns, the heat released is the cost of erasing that specific relational structure. The text says structure is energy. Now apply that to the human experience. The text posits that a relationship between two people is not just a sentiment, it is a real, energetic structure. When that bond is broken, say by death, the grief we feel is not just sadness. It's the thermodynamic cost of erasing a relational structure that was energetically real.
Okay, I see the elegance of the analogy, but I have to push back here. You're taking a principle derived from the behavior of logic gates and entropy and applying it to human grief. That feels like a category error. Grief is a neurochemical and psychological process. To say grief is the cost of erasing a bond makes it sound as if human relationships are subject to the second law of thermodynamics in a literal sense. It reduces the complexity of human emotion to heat dissipation. Are you really saying my heartbreak is just waste heat?
It from bit? Wheeler's point, which the text cites, is that physics bottoms out at information, at binary yes-no distinctions. If the universe is fundamentally made of information and relation, then a human relationship is just a complex macro state of that same fundamental reality. If it from bit holds, then the distinction you're making between atoms and relationships is, well, it's artificial. The text argues that love is the most expensive thing in the universe because it is energy under constraint. It costs energy to maintain a bond against the natural drift of entropy. That isn't poetry. That is the definition of work.
Energy under constraint. That implies that love is a burden. It implies love is expensive. And doesn't that match our experience? Real love exhausts us. It requires constant input to maintain the bond. The text validates that exhaustion. It says, you are doing the work of the universe. You are maintaining a low entropy state in a high entropy world. That is the definition of value.
I'll admit, framing love as anti-entropic work is compelling. It gives dignity to the struggle of relationships. But let's look at what this structural love actually looks like in the text's cosmology. Because it leans on the Kabbalistic concept of tzimtzum to explain creation, and this is where the theology gets really specific.
Yes, tzimtzum, or contraction. This is essential to the argument. The text asks, if God is infinite, Ein Sof, how can there be anything else? If the infinite fills everything, there's no room for a you or a me.
Right. So the theology says God withdraws, God contracts into God's self to create a vacated space or shalal.
Exactly. And the text identifies this withdrawal as the ultimate definition of love. Love is not consuming the other. Love is withdrawing to create logical space for the other to exist. It connects this to the Egyptian concept of ma'at, truth, order, balance. The ninth element that emerges from the Ogdoad is the bond itself. It implies that the very structure of reality is non-coercive. God does not force the world into being, God makes room for it.
Okay, but here's my issue with the non-coercive argument. The text links this to general relativity. It claims gravity is non-coercive because, according to Einstein, gravity isn't a force pulling you, it's the curvature of space-time. The Earth creates a curve, and the Moon follows its natural path, or geodesic, along that curve. The text calls this the cosmological image of love. But I have to ask, from the perspective of the falling object or the moon trapped in orbit, is there really a difference between following a curved geometry and being pulled? If I fall off a roof, gravity feels incredibly coercive. I don't have a choice in the matter. I am smashing into the pavement whether I consent to the curvature or not.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The distinction is between internal and external compulsion. In Newtonian physics, gravity is a rope pulling you against your will. In Einsteinian physics, you are moving freely in a straight line, but the environment itself, the relationship you are in, is curved. The text argues this is how love works. Love doesn't force you to obey. Love changes the geometry of your reality so that moving toward the beloved becomes your natural path. It's a profound shift in understanding law. It's not a command from above. It's the shape of the space between us.
But does this shape of space account for the darker parts of reality? Because if we're just following geometries, where does evil come in? This brings me to my strongest objection. which concerns the text's handling of darkness. It discusses Hesiod's Nyx, night, and Erebus, darkness, and Genesis 1.2. And it argues that darkness is not a substance and certainly not evil. It's defined as a condition of contrast.
Yes, darkness is upon the face of the deep. It's a prepositional phrase, not a noun. The text argues that darkness is the frame of intelligibility. You can't see light without contrast. A white page with white ink carries no information. You need the dark ink, the contrast, to have meaning.
Intellectually, I understand the necessity of contrast for information theory, but morally, the text seems to be saying that darkness, and by extension, perhaps suffering or alienation, is just a necessary boundary for the light to be visible. If darkness is not evil, but just a mechanism for visibility, are we ontologizing away the reality of evil? If I'm suffering in the darkness, it's small comfort to be told I'm merely providing the necessary contrast for someone else's light.
Well, I don't think the text is dismissing suffering. It's addressing the ontological status of darkness. The text cites the Gospel of John. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The argument is that darkness is constitutively dependent on light. Evil or darkness has no independent existence. It's a parasite on the good. The ethical application the text makes is actually quite powerful. It says that to demonize the shadow or the other is a category error. If you try to illuminate darkness entirely, to have pure, undifferentiated light, you end up with blindness. You need the other to be distinct from you to have a relationship with them.
That's the Mott aspect again, maintaining the balance. But there's a tension there. The text mentions Empedocles, who saw the universe as a cycle between philotes, love, and nekos, strife. Strife is what separates things. Love is what binds them. The text seems to want to redeem strife, or darkness, as just differentiation. But in human experience, strife isn't just difference. It's war, it's chaos, it's pain. I worry that this structural ontology cleans up the universe too much. It makes everything fit into this neat eightfold diagram where even the darkness is just a helpful frame. Reality feels messier than that.
I think the text would argue that the mess is what happens when we misunderstand the structure. The text ends with a coda on how we live. It argues that if we understand that bond is what entities are, we stop trying to force unity through coercion. Coercion is the attempt to eliminate the space of relation that Tzimtzum created. When we try to force things to be like us, we destroy the contrast. We destroy the darkness that makes light visible. The mess of war and strife is actually a failure to honor the structural necessity of the other.
So you're saying that the structural darkness, the differentiation, is good, but moral darkness or evil is what happens when we refuse to accept that differentiation.
Precisely. The text says, difference is not the enemy of unity. The Ogdoad requires all 8 conditions. If you try to collapse the wave function, so to speak, to only the parts you like, you destroy the intelligibility of the whole.
I can appreciate that distinction. It rescues the theory from being purely deterministic. And I suppose it ties back to the energy cost we discussed earlier. If you try to force unity, if you try to skip the hard work of relationship and just coerce the other, you're trying to cheat the thermodynamic cost.
Exactly. You're trying to get the bond without paying the energy. And physics says you can't do that.
I suppose my final hesitation is simply the scale of the claim. The text implies a unified account where ontology, what is, epistemology, how we know, and ethics, how we live, are all the same thing. That's a theory of everything that includes moral behavior.
It is ambitious.
Metaphors and the deep of Genesis. I wonder if it assumes too much. It reads general relativity into the Vedas and information theory into the Kabbalah. It suggests that ancient mystics were somehow intuiting quantum mechanics. That's a very romantic view of history.
Or it suggests that reality is one thing. If the mystics were encountering the nature of being and physicists are probing the nature of being, shouldn't we expect them to find the same structures? The text isn't saying Moses knew calculus. It's saying Moses experienced the deep, and Wheeler calculated the bit, and they are describing the same bedrock of existence.
A fair counterpoint.
We're nearing the end of our time. To summarize, The text with the beginning offers us a map where the universe is not a collection of lonely objects bouncing in a void, but a web of relations held together by a force that is simultaneously physical gravity and ontological love. It challenges us to see creation not as history, but as the ongoing articulation of this structure.
And while I remain skeptical of the perfect convergence, I think the seams between physics and theology are rougher than the text admits. I cannot deny the ethical power of the idea. The warning against coercion, the validation of the cost of relationships, and the idea that bond is more real than the individuals it connects, those are ideas worth testing against our own experience.
And that is the text's final invitation. Read this not as a system to be accepted, but as a map to be tested. If relation is primary, if we are made of our bonds, then the isolation so many of us feel is an illusion.
An illusion it costs a great deal of energy to maintain, apparently.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the physics of love.
It has been a pleasure.
Until next time, this has been The Debate.